Welcome back to the Krueg Show, everybody. We're talking NFL draft, a little post-mortem on the NFL draft with one of our good buddies, Rob Rang, who does a great job covering the NFL, Locked on Seahawks, Locked on NFL Draft. Check him out, foxsports.com. BC Lions of the CFL. The man does it all, and he's with us on the Krueg Show. Hey, Rob, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Larry. Thanks for having me on, as always.
Now, what's the logo that we're seeing in the top left on the shirt there? What are we repping today?
Well, that's one of the other jobs that I have. I'm still a full-time teacher at Mount Tahoma High School. I'm very proud of that fact. It's actually the school that I graduated from, that my dad graduated from, and I've been there for the last 17 years as a full-time English and history teacher. So I am not part of their football coaching staff. I got a couple other gigs out there that I'm working on, but I very much like to support the Thunderbirds.
So are you Mr. Rang most of the day, Mr. Rang?
I am, but yeah, I just prefer to go by Rob, just because I know that that's the way that most of the NFL draft community knows me as, and I'm one of those teachers that I try to stay young by just kind of calling myself by my first name rather than asking students to kind of give me that respect. I just think that, hey, if I get to call them by their first name, then why shouldn't they be able to call me by my first name? So Rob, Mr. Rang, Rob Rang, whatever that they call me, as long as they don't call me late for lunch, then it should be good.
I'd like you to just throw a little levity into the thing. Excuse me, Mr. Rang, can I call you Rob? No, you may not. No, you may not. You call me Mr. Rang, damn it. All right. Well, we're going to call you Rob. And Rob, what'd you think of, why don't we start with I want to get your thoughts on the Niners draft and Seahawks draft, but let's start with the Seahawks draft. The Seahawks draft, I thought John Schneider hit it out of the park. Now, I'm a John Schneider head. I got to admit, I think Schneider's good. I think he's he's got a great eye for personnel. Seems like he always gets guys that I personally liked. And they went in the first round with Charles Cross, the left tackle from Mississippi State. And I just thought that this was a blue chip player who's plug and play left tackle, that he's a terrific pass blocker. And he's done it in the SEC against all the great D linemen in the SEC. And I just loved his film. When I watched Cross, I thought, man, this is the prototype. This is what you're looking for at left tackle. What'd you think of the pick?
I liked their draft as a whole. I was actually a little bit surprised by the selection of Charles Cross. I wish I would have talked to you, Larry, one more time before I did my final mock draft, just because I did not think that Charles Cross was going to be Seattle's selection, even though left tackle was obviously a huge area of concern. I mean, this has been a club that has always prioritized run blocking before pass blocking. I mean, there's no question Charles Cross has the elite athletic ability, the length, the light feet. I mean, literally his nickname is Sweet Feet, and anybody who watches him can see why. But still, I mean, you're talking about an air raid offensive tackle. It was Joe Morehouse who actually recruited him to Mississippi State, not Mike Leach. But still, I mean, the antithesis of Seahawk football for years during John Schneider and Pete Carroll's tenure has been those air raid type of offensive linemen. And then Seattle went and shocked people by going with Charles Cross in the first round and then kind of doubling down with Abe Lucas, the right tackle, in the third round, another former air raid offensive lineman under Mike Leach. So there were some surprises there, but still, I really thought this was one of the better draft classes in the NFL. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a fairly local Seattle kind of guy. I'm actually a little bit closer to the state capital in Olympia than I am to Seattle proper. But at the same time, I think that there has been some drafts recently for the Seahawks that have failed to, keep that club competitive. But this draft class, I think, is one of the very better ones that John Schneider and Pete Carroll have put together in a long time. And of course, it's easier when you have, 4 selections among the top 72 picks, 3 selections among the top 41. And when you have that type of draft ammunition, it is an awful lot easier to get those blue chip players that you just mentioned.
Seattle's taken some chances on some rough characters, guys who have had checkered past. They did it with Frank Clark, and it worked, you could argue. Clark really turned into a player. Eventually, he moved on to KC. Then they tried it again with Malik McDowell, and it clearly did not work. And McDowell is out of the league and has had all kinds of problems. I really thought that they got they got that twitchy edge piece, but they also got a great kid in Boye Mafe. Mafe's doesn't have problems off the field. I think he's going to be a stellar, hardworking guy, and I don't know that there's a lot of. They need to coach him up, because what I saw was a guy who he can beat you with that first step quickness. He's got a first step that you can't coach, but then if you can neutralize him, there's not a lot of counter moves there. What did you see on film when you watched Boye Mafe? And were you obviously they're intrigued by the 4.5 speed at 260 pounds and the high character? I think it's a good combo. What did you think of the pick?
Again, another pick that I think makes a lot of sense for a club, a guy who I think is a dark horse defensive rookie of the year kind of candidate. Now, I do not think that he is going to come in and necessarily be a full-time starter for the Seahawks, because as you mentioned, Larry, I mean, he's a little rough around the edges, especially against the run. So you're going against a team like the 49ers, as run-oriented as they are, then, yeah, I think that you're going to see a little bit more of Darrell Taylor and the free agent that they signed from the Los Angeles Chargers, Uchenna Nwosu. But in terms of being a pass rush specialist, and let's face it, that's what the NFL is all about anymore. Yeah. Then I really think that Mafe makes a lot of sense for them. His initial quickness, just his ability. I was there at Seattle's rookie minicamp. I was really impressed by just the coordination of Mafe's hands and feet. When you marry those two together, that can be a really dangerous combination. And so I think that he is a guy that this is something that people say all the time. I think it's kind of a cliche among scouts, is that his best football is ahead of him, untapped potential, all that kind of stuff. But I think that it absolutely is true with Boye Mafe. I mean, he only started 13 games over 4 years in Minnesota, but he was also the best player, at least in terms of the votes, during the Senior Bowl. I mean, he was the National Defensive Player of the game. He had 3 tackles for loss, had 2 sacks, had a forced fumble. I think that's what Seattle is betting on, is that they see a guy who, again, his best football is ahead of him. Seattle just promoted their former defensive line coach, Clint Hurt, to defensive coordinator because of his ability to be able to kind of coax out that talent of guys like Boye Mafe. So I agree with you, Larry. I think that this is another one of the picks for Seattle that I think has a lot of boom potential to him.
Kenneth Walker was a steal, too. I mean, I thought Kenneth Walker could have been a first-round draft choice. He was really, really good. He was good at Wake. He was good at Michigan State. I thought he was the best running back in the draft. I know they're leaning on some young quarterbacks, Drew Lock, and why not have a dominant run game? And I look at Walker as he's going to take Penny's job, and he's going to be the number 1 back. What are you hearing? What do you think? What's that competition going to look like this summer?
Yeah, there was 3 practices there at that rookie minicamp, and I only went to the one on Saturday. And Kenneth Walker absolutely stunned people with just how explosive that he was on Friday, the very first day of rookie minicamp. And then at that point, they basically were icing the hamstrings, and he had a couple of opportunities to do some, minimal work on Saturday, the day that I was there. But I, had an opportunity to watch him on tape, as you mentioned, at Wake Forest as well as Michigan State. I thought he was a good player at Wake Forest. I thought he was an exceptional player at Michigan State. Of course, was the Doak Walker Award winner, should have been among the 5 players who was invited to New York City as a Heisman Trophy candidate. Led Power 5 rushers in yardage at Michigan State. And let's be real, I mean, the Spartans were very much a run-first offense. Everybody knew that Ken Walker was going to be the guy handling the rock, and yet he still was able to rush for roughly 1,700 yards, leading all Power 5 offenses in rushing yards this past season. Then he goes to the combine and runs a 4.38. I mean, my goodness, when you're 210 pounds, you're running the 4.3s. I mean, that's just exceptional. And so that's what the Seahawks are banking on. I mean, and again, this is a club that has their concerns at the quarterback position. They were run heavy even when they had a future Hall of Famer in Russell Wilson. They're certainly going to be run heavy, whether it be Geno Smith, whether it be Drew Lock, whether it be even Jacob Eason. That's going to be the big story here. Is I think the Seahawks are going to be that much more run heavy, and with Ken Walker, they got a guy who has that type of potential to really be a potential NFL rushing title leader. And so then that's, to me, justifies the selection. I personally like Breece Hall from Iowa State, but I think that they were basically 1-2, and that's the way they came off the board as well.
Man, you better be able to cover in this division. Niners have Ayuk and Debo. They just added Danny Gray. He's got a lot of speed. I mean, obviously the Rams, they got Allen Robinson. They got Cooper Kupp, DeAndre Hopkins, D-Hops in Arizona. They got a good receiving core there. You better be able to cover. And I loved the Seahawks picks on the corner. They took Kobe Bryant, who was the Thorpe Award winner. People forget, Sauce Gardner was the best corner in this draft, but it was Kobe Bryant that won the Thorpe. And then Tariq Woolen. I mean, I know a lot of people are down on Woolen because, he's raw and he's got some bad film. But, man, the highlight reel is awesome. Like, you're talking about prototype. 6'4", long arms, really tenacious. You got to coach him up. How good's their secondary coach, and what'd you think of those two picks? I think I love both those picks as long as you can coach them up. Who's their secondary coach? How's he gonna do?
Well, I think he's going to do well because it's not only Seattle secondary coach, it's the fact that you got Pete Carroll,
Sure.
a former safety himself, and just his track record of kind of molding young defensive backs and making them into superstars. I mean, kind of speaks for itself. Sean Desai is a guy that Seattle brought in from the Chicago Bears, and he kind of implemented a whole bunch of 3 safety looks for the Chicago Bears. That's something that I think that Seattle is going to use. I don't expect Tariq Woolen to be able to kind of see the field as early as maybe some of the hype out there would suggest. I mean, all the guy did is run a 4.26 40. No one at 6'4", 205 pounds has ever ran that fast at the combine. They had led the combine this year at the 42-inch vertical jump, was at the Senior Bowl, and was very impressive there as well. You're right, Larry. I mean, there's some ugly tape out there as well, and he is sushi raw. I mean, my goodness, this is a raw player. A guy's a former wide receiver. When you watch him on tape, you see some times where he just doesn't want to tackle people. He's a former wide receiver, and he played like it at times. And if you are going to get onto the field, at least it's a defensive back for the Seahawks and Pete Carroll, you have to be able to tackle. I mean, that's just the way it is in the NFL. But in terms of his physical upside, oh my goodness. I mean, what a guy that just kind of screams Pete Carroll in the Seattle Seahawks. And, there's a lot of buzz out here in Seattle way that everybody wants to kind of compare him to Richard Sherman. And you can understand why. I mean, former wide receiver, Senior Bowl standout, 5th round pick, all of the things that scream, again, Seahawks and suggesting that Tariq Woolen could be that superstar. But let's kind of hold all of that for a while. I mean, one of the things,
brakes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you guys in San Francisco know very well what Richard Sherman can do, whether he be a member of your team or a member of Seattle. I mean, it's not just Sherman's ball skills. It's not just his physicality. I mean, he was one of the most reliable open field tacklers I've ever seen at the cornerback position. I mean, those long arms are not just about tipping passes. They're about being able to kind of lasso ball carriers. And that's something that Tariq Woolen definitely needs to improve on if he is going to be any type of a player for Seattle on defense. But on special teams, however, I do think that he is able to come in and contribute immediately. And Kobe Bryant, you mentioned him right off the bat as the Thorpe Award winner. To me, he is the guy that actually is easily the more pro ready and polished of the 2 defensive backs. And that's what I like the most about Seattle's draft. Just to kind of summarize here for a moment, what would be the fact that they did double dip. They had 4 big areas of concern: offensive tackle, cornerback, wide receiver, and edge rusher. And they took 2 of each. And so, hey, yeah, I mean, maybe that's because they weren't sure that the guy that they drafted first was going to wind up becoming a difference maker. But when you kind of double dip like that, then I think that it allows you a little bit of, miss factor if that is indeed the case. And I think it also allows the club to be that much more versatile, that much deeper. And when you are a young club, as Seattle is now, considering the fact that they trade away Russell Wilson, they release Bobby Wagner, clearly this is a team in rebuild mode, then you got to be able to have these young players who are going to be able to fill out that entire roster. So that to me is one of the coolest things about Seattle's draft class. You got a guy who is as plug and play as it gets in Kobe Bryant, and then you have that rookie in Tariq Woolen who has such great upside that you're going to be able to kind of develop the way that Pete Carroll wants to develop them.
As you can all tell, Rob Rang knows his stuff when it comes to the NFL draft. That's why we love having Rob on. All right, one more on the Seahawks, and then we will talk a little bit about the better team, the other team, the 49ers in the division. You mentioned two guys at each spot. To me, I thought John Schneider, the reason I love Schneider is I think that he always understands where the value is in the draft. And to me, the value on day 3 was at the wide receiver position. And he got two of my very favorite prospects in this entire draft. Bo Melton played at Rutgers. He's a bigger guy and he ran in the 4.3s. And if you watch the film, you can see the explosive traits. It's a big guy who's fast. And I'm not sure why he fell to day 3, to be totally honest, because to me, the film said he should have been a 3rd or 4th round pick. But it's a very loaded draft of wide receivers, and beauty's in the eye of the beholder. The other guy is Derek the Freak Young, who played at Lenore Ryan, and he's like 6'2", 220, 225. I'm not sure what he is. I'm not sure if he's a tight end. I'm not sure if he's a receiver. I'm not sure if he's an H-back. All I know is this guy runs angry. He's got big hands. He's got athleticism for days. This guy is, the guy who looks the part coming off the bus for sure. Give me your thoughts on those two guys, and did they look like anything at rookie minicamp? Because Melton played in a big conference, Derek Young played in a tiny conference, but they both have huge talent.
They certainly do have huge talent, and Seattle needs it. I mean, obviously they have guys like Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, and and that's great for the Seahawks. But the talent at that point drops off pretty significantly, and that's with all due respect to guys like D. Eskridge. It was their first selection. He was a 2nd round pick a year ago. And then, of course, Freddie Swain was a middle round selection out of Florida who has shown steady improvement over his NFL career. But after that, I mean, it truly is a pretty precipitous drop off. And so I think that this made a lot of sense for Seattle again to kind of double down. With Bo Melton, I just think that he is the classic slot receiver. I mean, not only is he fast, and you're absolutely right, Larry, he is fast. I mean, he ran the 4.3s officially. But it's the change of direction, the short area quickness that I really liked about him as well. His short shuttle and 3-cone drills were spectacular. And then you can see that on tape. And, and I saw that at the Senior Bowl. I saw that on the Rutgers tape as well. The problem is he drops a few footballs, and that would be the same thing that Derek Young's problem is. And, of course, that's priority number 1 if you're going to be playing at the wide receiver position in the NFL. Derek Young is a bigger guy, as you mentioned, 6'2", 6'3", 225 pounds. I mean, he was moved all over the field. I mean, he was basically, for Lenore Ryan at least, he was their Deebo Samuel. He was a guy that could, do some jet sweeps, line up in the backfield as a running back, be a wide receiver. Hell, he played a little bit of tight end early in his career there. But he is a guy who kind of slipped through the cracks. I mean, he signed with Lenore Ryan at 5'10", 180 pounds roughly, running in the 5.0 kind of 40-yard dash. But when he left, he ran in the low 4.4s, at 6'3", 225, and is absolutely just kind of a built kind of a guy. So he is, again, sushi raw. He is a guy that Seattle's kind of gambling on the traits. Bo Melton, I was stunned. I'm with you. I think that he should have been a 3rd or 4th round pick. I think that is a perfect example of the fact that we saw so many wide receivers come off the board early. 6 of the top 18 selections this year, that set an NFL record. 13 that went in the first 2 rounds, that set an NFL record. And because of that, you had so many teams that already kind of, spent their selection on a wide receiver early that it allowed a lot of really good football players to slide into the middle and late rounds. Danny Gray, the 49ers, being an example of that as well. And so I think that some of the wide receivers that fell into the middle and late rounds, I think are going to wind up being steals. And I think the Seattle and San Francisco each wound up getting a couple of them.
Yeah, no, it's a good call. I mean, some teams will use multiple picks, but usually you've got a myriad of needs. And if you address it in round 2, that means you're going to pass in round 4, no matter if the guy's a higher value. And if you have enough teams in that same boat, there was going to be some group of these receivers who kind of got suppressed a little bit value-wise. And I think that's what happened. I think Melton's going to make that team. All right, let's talk. Before we actually talk about the Niners, let's pay the bills, and then we'll come back and get Rob's thoughts on the 49ers. But first, a message from our sponsor. Larry Krueger here for Telmetrics. Thanks to Casey Bateman and the good people at Telmetrics. If you're an occupational therapist, if you're an orthopedic surgeon, a chiropractor, a physical therapist of any kind, Telmetrics is designed for you to use in your practice and will greatly benefit your patients. Telmetrics uses computer vision and artificial intelligence and provides a platform for outpatient rehab therapy services, both in the clinical and the telehealth environments. So using Telmetrics can improve your patient's experience and much more. So for all your sports injury needs, or if you're a physical rehabilitation specialist of any kind, make sure you use telmetrics.co, TELMETRIX.co. And thanks to Casey Bateman and all the good people at Telmetrics for being a proud sponsor of the Krueg. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Dan Coach Emilio. Dan is a buddy, and he is a phenomenal retirement planning specialist. And you can contact him today at securemoney.com or at his number, 925-628-9966. There's a lot of uncertainty in our world right now, and you want to make sure that your money is secure. That is the key. Danny's got 25 years of experience, born and raised right here in the Bay Area, and he can help you get an immediate 10% premium bonus on your principal retirement account. So give him a call, 925-628-9966. He'll make an appointment with you, and you can sit down. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of a deal. He'll consult with you and come up with a strategy to get you going to where you want to be. Once again, 925-628-9966, securemoney.com on the web. And thanks to Dan Coach Emilio and all the people at Secure Money for being proud sponsors of the Krueg Show. All right, welcome back to the Krueg Show. Rob Rang with us as we talk a little bit about the NFL draft that came down a couple weeks ago. All right, Niners went Drake Jackson with their first pick at the 61st pick overall. How much did you watch Jackson? What did you think of the SC pass rusher?
Oh my goodness. I just think that at number 61 overall, are you kidding me? I mean, oh my goodness. I mean, Drake Jackson, I just love the positional versatility that he demonstrated. I mean, whether you're asking him to gain some weight and be able to play along defensive line, you want him to drop some weight and be able to drop back and play at that off-ball linebacker position. It's funny. I mean, we just talked about a guy that kind of comes off the bus looking as impressive as he does in Seattle's wide receiver, Derek Young from Lenore-Ryan. I mean, just a physically impressive guy. And then you see Drake Jackson, who's got a little bit more fleshiness to him. And you kind of think, okay, this guy isn't a great athlete. And then you watch him change directions at the combine. And I mean, that to me was one of the more impressive things I saw at the combine. I don't give a darn about what guys time this and that. I mean, who actually is athletic? And I thought that Drake Jackson, with his ability to change directions, to accelerate smoothly, I think that he is easily San Francisco's best draft pick, and at least in my opinion. I just absolutely love this selection for them, considering where they got him, considering the talent that they already have on the defensive side of the ball. I really think that the 49ers hit it out of the park with that very first selection that they made, just because I think that they got a player who frankly should have been a top 40, top 50 selection at the absolute worst. To get him at 61 playing a premium position that Drake Jackson plays, I really thought that was one of the steals of this year's draft class.
How about Ty Davis-Price, the LSU running back? LSU, the one thing you talk to scouts and they'll tell you, man, always take a real extra look at the LSU prospects because they really do recruit on a high level. They got a great program. Their players oftentimes excel in the NFL. Ty Davis-Price, only a one-year guy, really, but, man, he had some huge games. He was absolutely monster against Kentucky. He was bigger against Florida. How do you see him transitioning? 220 pounds, runs a pretty decent 40 time. Do you think he'll emerge as a key running back for them?
I think he can. I mean, that's the thing is like, it is a losing proposition to bet against Kyle Shanahan at the running back position. I mean, the
Yeah.
man is just a genius with what he's been able to do. And then you bring in Anthony Lynn, as the running back coach as well. I mean, oh my goodness. I mean, that is just like, complementing gold with another, precious metal. I mean, my goodness, it is just unbelievable in terms of the coaching. And then you got a guy like Ty Davis Price who just has, the size. He's got speed. He's got production against SEC competition. I mean, he led LSU in rushing yards each of the past 2 seasons. And to me, anybody who has any questions about it, you just said it, Larry. I mean, just watch what he did against Kentucky. Watch what he did against Florida. I mean, Florida, oh my goodness, Florida is a really talented team. And for him to set the single game rushing record for LSU against Florida, I mean, that just says it all to me. So I had my reservations about him. I really thought that he maybe should have been, drafted a round later. But at the same time, I think that San Francisco is a little bit like Seattle in that they want to run the football. I mean, they don't care what everybody else is doing. They want to run the football. They want to embarrass you. And I think when you look at Davis Price, I see a guy whose best football is still ahead of him. And we used that kind of cliche earlier with Seattle with Boye Mafe. And that's what I see with Davis Price is a guy who can be that bull in the china shop that can absolutely knock people on their backsides. He also has straight line speed. So that was one that I didn't love it when the selection first happened. I thought that this was San Francisco kind of getting a little bit cute, maybe kind of in going with one of those kind of luxury picks. But when you consider the durability issues that San Francisco's had at the running back position over the last couple of years, and just how important running back is to that club, just like Seattle and Ken Walker, I really think that the selection made an awful lot of sense for them.
How about Danny Gray? Gives them a home run hitter. Obviously, the Niners haven't had that deep speed. They had Ted Ginn a number of years ago. They haven't really had that guy that can take the top off. Gray is that kind of guy. I really liked him. I thought his 4.33 speed. I thought he played even faster than that. To be honest, I thought he had kind of Tyreek Hill type explosiveness. What did you think of him at SMU? And Roberson was the other receiver there. A lot of people thought he was going to be the guy this year, and Gray kind of outperformed him.
Yeah, that's the thing is that I thought that, you're playing at SMU, you're playing at a team that's going to throw the football all over the yard. And so I thought that he was in position to excel. And of course he did so. I thought that he would run well. Of course that he did. And again, to me, it's kind of like Drake Jackson. It's a little bit like Ty Davis Price as well, in that it'd be one thing if he was coming to a club and was being asked to carry the load. But when you got Debo, when you got Brandon Ayuk, when you got George Kittle, I mean, he is going to be asked to basically be just that vertical threat, and he can excel in that role. Now, I'm curious to see what San Francisco is going to do at the quarterback position, if they're going to go with Jimmy Garoppolo, and you're going to ask Gray to kind of be that guy who can be that short to intermediate kind of level threat. And I think that he can do that. But I think where he really could excel is whenever San Francisco decides to make that transition, of course, to the young quarterback, then you're going to be able to really take advantage of the greater arm strength that Trey Lance offers with Danny Gray. I mean, he's got that type of vertical speed. And considering all the talent San Francisco has, then why not take a guy who basically can roast one-on-one coverage? And that's exactly what Danny Gray offers.
Yeah, he is. He's a fast guy. How about Brock Purdy? What did you think of Purdy in the draft process? I mean, he was good at Iowa State, but I kind of view him as a backup quarterback with kind of a marginal and maybe even a below marginal NFL arm. How do you see Purdy?
Yeah, I agree with you, Larry. Brock Purdy was a guy I was higher on after watching him in Ames, at Iowa State and what he was able to do for the Cyclones. And I like the fit because, of course, the San Francisco 49ers, like the Seattle Seahawks, we talked about this before, they're going to run the football. So you've got to be a quarterback who has that mentality that not every single play is going to be based on your arm. It's going to be sometimes you got to just hand the ball off to your superstar running back. And not every quarterback is wired that way. So in that regard, I do like this selection. I just love the grit that Brock Purdy competed with throughout his entire career. But I'll say this. I went to Las Vegas, to Las Vegas, to the East-West Shrine Bowl, and I really thought that Brock Purdy was going to be the best quarterback on the field there. And he was going up against some guys like Derek King from Jack Cohn from Notre Dame, Derek King from Miami. I thought that E.J. Perry from Brown actually wound up being the best quarterback on the field. And I really thought that Brock Purdy struggled a little bit. And so that to me was the biggest area of concern I had. I had Brock Purdy as a 5th-round pick entering that week, and I dropped him down to the 7th round when I saw him. I just thought that he did not look the part, not look as good as I expected. So I think that with all due respect to Brock Purdy, who, again, I just love the fire that he plays with. But at the same time, I do think that Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance are pretty assured of their spots in San Francisco's rotation.
Yeah, 2 day 3 guys that caught my eye. Kalia Davis from Central Florida, defensive lineman. It could have gone on day 2, fell to day 3. And then Tariq Castro Fields from Penn State. I mean, Castro Fields, 6'1", he ran in the 5.4 threes. To me, he looks like maybe he should have been gone a round or 2 higher. What did you think of those 2 prospects in the draft lead up?
Yeah, I think kind of working backwards, I would say Castro Fields. I mean, he was a guy that, as you said, I mean, the traits are middle round at worst. The tape is a little bit up and down, and that would be one of the areas of concern I have. But at the same time, again, at Penn State, he had a pass rush in front of him to help him be successful, and that's one of the reasons why he was a 3-time all-conference pick for the Nittany Lions. And obviously, the pass rush that the San Francisco 49ers possess is going to be even that much better. So I'm really intrigued by what he is able to offer them, especially as we're talking about a late 6th-round pick. I mean, my goodness, at that point, yeah, I think that's just stealing. So to me, that is a guy that I am intrigued by. And then you mentioned Kalia Davis. I mean, I agree with you. You don't have to watch much to be able to see his first step quickness. And there is not many guys who have that just quick twitch at 300 plus pounds. Coming off the ACL injury, of course, sat out the 2020 season, due to the COVID concerns. I mean, you don't know exactly what you're getting at this point. But again, considering what San Francisco already has on the outside, you have a really good football player in Eric Armstead as well. Of course, is a big man in the middle, Javon Kinlaw as well. But those are all guys who are 6'5", 6'6". So to me, it made a lot of sense for San Francisco to get kind of a shorter, squattier, quicker guy to be able to kind of potentially complement that. I still think he's a pretty raw player, that he's got some work he needs to do. Some people thought that speaking of flesh, we talked before about Drake Jackson maybe coming in a little bit heavier than some had thought. I think that when you look at Davis, you see a guy who maybe is a little bit chubby, and far be it from me, to criticize anybody about being a touch chubby. But I just see a guy who his quickness is really intriguing. And so I just think that he is one that this is exactly why you want to have those day 3 selections in this particular draft class, because I think that he is a guy that does have some boom factor to him, but at the same time has a little bit of bust factor to him as well, because he simply was not very productive over his 3 seasons of playing legitimate ball at UCF.
Last one for you. Do you think if the 49ers get to July and they decide they're going to cut Jimmy Garoppolo, do you think Pete Carroll would have interest? Do you think if he didn't have to trade for him and he could just add Garoppolo for nothing in July, do you think Pete will pounce? Or do you think, you know what? No, they like Drew Lock. They're going to, the 5'11" quarterback that they drafted or that they got after the draft, I think is pretty exciting. Lewis, I believe his name, Levi Lewis. Yep. I can't see. I was kind of intrigued by that addition, but what do you think? Do you think Seattle is intrigued with Lewis, or do you think that if Jimmy's free and he's sitting there in July, that Pete will jump on him?
I think that Pete Carroll and the Seahawks would have to at least consider it, not only because I think Jimmy Garoppolo is legitimately one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the world and deserves to be a starter in the NFL, but also just because, I mean, you know how it is, Larry. I mean, divisional opponents love to steal from each other. I can't tell you how many times that you got to see, at least Seahawk fans got to see kind of Pete Carroll and John Schneider kind of wink at each other, kind of give them the little shot to the ribs with DJ Reed, and the fact that they were able to kind of steal him from San Francisco as well. I mean, you're stealing from a divisional opponent, and we all know the competitiveness of these guys at that level. At the same time, I would be surprised, frankly, if Seattle makes any type of move at the quarterback position based, what I've seen and heard. I think that they are intrigued by what Drew Lock offers. I think that they feel that Geno Smith, while maybe doesn't have the elite physical potential, if you were to extrapolate his numbers from last year, I mean, he started 3 games while Russell Wilson was out. And okay, again, it was just 3 games, and one of them was against the Jacksonville Jaguars. But still, if you were to spread those numbers out over the course of a season, he would have finished, and again, caveat here, but he would have finished 21 touchdowns against only 4 interceptions. I mean, that's exactly what Pete Carroll's looking for. He wants somebody who's going to protect the football. And then Jacob Eason, former University of Washington player, I mean, for your third quarterback, I mean, this kid's got a gun.
Oh, he's got great skills throwing the ball.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of questions about other stuff with Jacob Eason. But you mentioned Lewis as well. I just think that Seattle is kind of intrigued by what they already have at the quarterback position. And if everything goes to heck in a handbasket, then they have 2 first-round picks next year. They got 2 second-round picks next year. Again, if everything falls apart, they're likely going to be in a position to get a young quarterback next year and potentially could even trade up to get an even better one. So I'd be surprised if Jimmy Garoppolo is in fact released. I think that Seattle has to kind of kick the can and at least consider him. But still, I would be surprised if Seattle goes into next year's training camp with anybody other than Drew Lock, Geno Smith, Jacob Eason as their top 3 quarterbacks.
Follow this guy, Locked on Seahawks, Locked on NFL Draft, FoxSports.com, BC Lions, doing stuff for the BC Lions and the CFL. He knows his stuff. You can tell. Rob, you're a great follow on Twitter, at Rob Rang. Is that what it is? At Rob Rang? Simple as that?
Yep. That's
Rob,
it.
great stuff, man. Always good to catch up with you, buddy, and keep it rolling, man. I love your breakdown on the players, and hopefully when the Niners hit the Seahawks this year, we'll get a chance to chop it up.
We certainly will. Larry, thanks for having me on as always.
As always, the great Rob Rang. He fires every single time. We appreciate him stopping by.
Yeah, never met a man I've been scared of. Careful, you gon' get exactly what you asked for. Here for whatever you bring me, getting handled. I answer to no one, I don't need to hassle. Yeah, we ain't never fall back. Hold our ground where